You're listening to the Ask Drone U podcast. You ask, we answer your drone questions. Whether you're here to turn your passion into profit or you simply fly for fun, we're a community of learners and teachers who aspire to achieve greatness. We are
Drone U.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of Ask Drone U. As always, my name is Paul, and I have a very special guest today. The CEO of Skydio, Adam Bry, is here joining us today to answer some tough and some fun questions. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Paul. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm grateful that you're here in the studio. We don't get a lot of interview guests that come all the way to the studio here in Northern Colorado, so that was awesome.
Worked out well. My family's from Colorado originally, so I was here for Thanksgiving. I thought we might as well do it live.
No, it's awesome. So let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite ski resort or snowboarding resort that you like to go to?
That's where we're going to start. So I grew up going to Silver Creek, which I don't think even exists anymore. It was kind of like you'd head towards Winter Park and then head north. I spent a lot of time at Winter Park, a lot of time at Copper.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I haven't really skied since high school.
I haven't honestly snowboarded since college, but I figured I'd ask you. So there's always those cabin retreats that are lovely to go to. But I know a lot of people are really interested in some questions regarding Skydio. And Skydio has kind of been at the heart of some Chinese retaliation. We're just going to get right into it. I know that you've been having issues with supply chain for your batteries and for other things. But before we kind of go right into it, what led up to this point? You know, a lot of people online are saying that Skydio is behind all of the DJI lobbying. And there are also people that are going online and they're saying that there's no issue with DJI whatsoever. So maybe what we could do is kind of start from what led up to this point.
Well, a lot. You know, it's really the whole history of the drone industry. So, we start from the very beginning. Drones, in a lot of ways, kind of grew out of radio-controlled airplanes. And this is the world that I come from. I grew up flying radio-controlled airplanes, not too far from here. And, growing up, we didn't think much about it, that most of the products we were using were made in China. These are basically RC toys. And most consumer electronics historically have also been made in China. And the drones that we use today, from a hardware perspective, are really the combination of RC toys and consumer electronics. And so China and Chinese companies got off to a pretty significant head start in the drone industry. And I think we've been through this journey over the last 10 or 15 years where these things that started off looking like consumer toys then became critical tools for all kinds of critical applications. And I think they're on their way to becoming infrastructure. And as we've gone from kind of toys to tools to infrastructure, I think it's become increasingly clear to most people, maybe not everybody, but to most people, that there are really significant national security stakes at play here. And
do you feel like it's become more clear since small UAS have kind of been like the backbone of the Ukrainian war, and we're seeing that the most value is coming out of these cheap drones that can, drop bombs 5 miles away? I mean, is that kind of like the denouement almost?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think the war in Ukraine has really just kind of proven beyond any reasonable doubt how important these things are, and that it's really dual use technology. And one of the things, there's a lot of different ways you can think about the state of the industry, but I think one of the things that is pretty clear is that in any modern conflict, it's near certainty that our adversaries are going to be flying Chinese drones and probably flying DJI drones. And that level of, the Chinese call it civil military fusion, is just one of the realities of the space that we're in. So, there's a lot we could talk about here. I think one of the really recent events was Skydio being sanctioned by the Chinese government, which you can read in different ways. The stated reason for the sanctions was us selling drones to Taiwan.
Seems kind of like political BS, if we're being honest.
Well, I think that
because it was the fire department, right?
Yeah, we sold to the Taiwan Fire Department, and we're proud to sell to the Taiwan Fire Department. They have an important mission. I think that it comes against the backdrop of escalating competition and geopolitical tension in the drone industry, and DJI being subject to more and more restrictions in the U.S. And so I think it's likely a retaliatory act on the part of the Chinese government, which is not entirely unexpected. I mean, we've done a lot of work over the last few years to get our supply chain out of China. We still obviously had critical dependence on batteries, which we were aware of, and we were working on alternatives, which we've now accelerated. Well, we can get into more of like the perceptions that are out there in the drone industry.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I think that there is that perception that Skydio has kind of been behind the lobbying against DJI, and I think some of the perception has been that not just that Skydio has been against the lobbying against DJI, but that DJI is retaliating because of said lobbying. Would you say, is that accurate?
So, we see the comment boards and the forums that are out there. And I think the notion that this is all the restrictions against Chinese drones are coming from Skydio or a result of things that we're doing is frankly kind of nuts. And it's really a bummer situation because you've got a lot of people that have built up businesses based on drones. And historically, 5-6 years ago, the only option out there was DJI. And so people started building businesses based on DJI drones. You've now got a situation where people have a pretty strong economic dependence on these Chinese drones. And the prospect of them getting taken away is scary and it sucks. And people didn't do anything wrong to do this. And so people are pissed and they're afraid. And I get that. And I think it's a really unfortunate situation. And when people get pissed, they look for somebody to blame. And as the largest US manufacturer and a company that certainly has played some role in some of these conversations, a lot of that anger is aimed at us right now. I think I understand where it comes from. I think it's pretty substantially misdirected. The U.S. government actions against DJI started before we even had a product in market. We launched our first product in 2018. Going back to 2017, 2016, the U.S. DoD was pointing out that there were security risks and issues associated with DJI drones, and it's basically just been a building drumbeat since then. There's different flavors of arguments out there, but I think anybody who's saying that there's like zero security or national security or cybersecurity risk associated with using these drones just isn't paying attention,
Well, or they're not going on GitHub. I mean, like I saw 51 drones going out there and saying there are no issues whatsoever with DJI. It's like, dude, you can literally go on GitHub and download thousands of slide decks. You can translate them. And they had a program where they were literally capturing data from your cell phone, capturing data off the drone. They were mapping out critical infrastructure. And like, even to be funny, there was a guy, Kevin Finisterre, who posted on Reddit. He goes, I know you're not worried about the photos coming off of your drone, but here was a dude flying naked out in the desert of like Arizona and it captured a photo of him. I know a lot of people aren't worried, but some of the rumors that I've also heard too is that whenever you plug one of these DJI drones into network-based infrastructure, that they have essentially created some sort of, I don't know if Trojan horse is the right term here, but have created security vulnerabilities for the Chinese government to essentially infiltrate national infrastructure. That is some of the things that I've heard.
Look, I guess what I would say is that a modern drone is a fully software-defined device, right? There's millions of lines of code running on these systems. They use software-defined radios, which means that they can communicate on multiple frequencies with multiple protocols in ways that may or may not be apparent to the user. And the behavior of the device is entirely driven by software. And what that means is that there's basically just infinite surface area to do essentially whatever the manufacturer and whoever writes the software wants to do. And ultimately, Chinese technology is, technology made by Chinese companies is going to be beholden to the foreign policy of the Chinese government. It really, at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter what the company wants to do. That's just the way their system works. The government can show up at your doorstep and say, do X, Y, Z, and you have no choice but to comply. That's just a reality, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can look at this and say, like, all right, should the U.S. military be relying on Chinese drones? Like, probably most people would answer no to that. At the other end of the spectrum, like, is there a lot of risk associated with the kid's toy that's made in China, the drone kid's toy that's made in China? Like, most people probably say, like, maybe not zero risk, but the risks are probably pretty low. And I think there's a lot of room for debate in between. What people don't understand, and it's unfortunate that like more of this isn't happening in the open, honestly, but the U.S. government knows this, right? Like the members of Congress, members of the executive branch, they're getting daily security briefings, so they know what's happening. They're thinking about these things, and they're thinking about ways that we can protect national security and try to build up a U.S. drone industry constantly. By the time that Skydio gets involved in these conversations, almost always it's the case that they're contemplating some kind of action, and we're trying to be the most reasonable voice in the room. Like, we're trying to advocate for longer transition periods. We're trying to advocate for funding to help businesses and organizations that are impacted by bans or restrictions make the transition. So we're certainly involved in the conversation, and we're very transparent that we think it's really important to have a strong U.S. drone industry, and we think the security risks associated with Chinese drones are real. But we also understand the reality of the industries that exist today. And I think, flat blanket ban across every industry with no funding and no transition period is not healthy or good for anybody.
Well, yeah, it would be like, I think they said $116 billion loss across the industry, which is huge.
Yeah, I think that number might come from DJI. Like, I don't know exactly how they did that math.
Yeah. No, it's also like the math that they didn't ever showcase where the FAA said, we have 900,000 registered drones. And I knew the chief counsel at DJI, and he's like, we've sold in the millions every year for like 9 years. So it's a 10x multiple of what they're saying is out there. So, I mean, DJI has been doing what's in DJI's best interest from the beginning. I mean, I'll never forget when they launched the Inspire 1 and they beta tested it on everyone who bought one right away. I don't know if you remember the video of the guy who literally had to fly away right into his garage in the first 5 seconds of turning the drone on.
Yeah, I think we might have used that in one of our marketing videos.
But like, going back to the meat and potatoes here, you make a really good point that without funding, without a transition period, and I've been advocating for this too, is that why don't we have more intelligent methodologies of handling this problem? Why are we just going to ban them, take them on the FCC blacklist or whatever? That's going to hurt a lot of people. And then the question is, well, why can't American drone companies create and compete on the consumer level? And are you saying that they've just had such a long runway to start? They've had the scalability of manufacturing for decades, that's why they're ahead of us? And can we even come back from that?
So working backwards to that, I definitely believe we can compete. I very strongly believe we can compete. And, it's not going to be a one company solution, but the Skydio X10 is capable of doing things that no other drone in the world is doing. The Wingtra mapping drone is capable of doing things that no other drone in the world is capable of doing. Free fly drones have capabilities that DJI and others don't have. I think it's just not the case that U.S. companies can't compete and build superior technology. Now, DJI has a head start on a lot of this stuff, and they're operating at scale, but we are continually making progress. I think if you just look at our history of products from R1 to Skydio 2 to X2 to X10, there's tremendous steps up in technology in all of those. And it's reflective of us making deeper and deeper investments in wireless systems and camera systems and propulsion systems and all the different things it takes to build a great drone. So one of the realities of hardware is the larger the volume and scale you get up to, the more cost leverage you get and the lower cost you can make your stuff. And we are on that curve now. X10 is substantially higher volumes than X2, which is enabling us to do more and get more leverage in our supply chain. And our plan over time is to keep, ratcheting up the capabilities and the volumes, and ratcheting down the price of our entry level systems as we do so. And that's just the reality of the curve in hardware. Tesla went through a similar thing. They started with the Roadster and then the Model S and then the Model 3. And, it's not a perfect one-to-one analogy, but in general, that's what we're trying to do. And I think doing now from a capability standpoint, and you'll see over time us doing from a price standpoint. I think the other thing that is important to understand that I really think of as one of the dominant features that shapes the drone landscape is just how complex these devices are. And it's easy to not appreciate this when you pick up something that kind of looks like a piece of consumer electronics. It weighs a couple of pounds. But I always say, building a drone is much closer to building like a rocket ship or a fighter jet than people realize. And there's aerodynamics and vibration and thermals, and really advanced compute systems and optics. And you're doing this in an incredibly size and weight constrained system where, you're fighting for every gram, and the tolerance for failure is basically near zero. Like a 15 millisecond glitch in software could mean the thing falling out of the sky. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many companies have come and gone over the years, is they just couldn't get over that hump of really hard technology. And when you're building these things, there's different ways you can approach it. The two ends of the spectrum, I would say, are like vertically integrated, where you're doing more core technology development yourself, or modular, where you're buying a bunch of off-the-shelf components, maybe an off-the-shelf autopilot, off-the-shelf speed controllers, off-the-shelf motors. And both of those things can work, but the highest performing systems come from more vertical integration, where you're designing the electronics and the software and the mechanical systems and the interface, all these things together to work really well together. And that's the approach that we've taken. I think it results in more capability in a smaller, lighter package, but it's also more expensive. And it takes more time to develop.
Well, and you bring up a lot of really good points. And honestly, I have so many questions. I'm not sure which way to offshoot, because I'm like, when I remember seeing the S2, the body off the S2, and it was like a vast majority of the S2 was like a GPU, which was insane to think about inside of a drone. And I've built drones. We built drones with Sandia National Labs. Like, I'm very familiar with how drones are built. And that brings me to a question. Is the difficulty and scalability for American manufacturers also in their systems integrator limits? And what I mean by that, because it's not very well said, is like we have Auterion, right? And Auterion is powering a lot of the American options. And Auterion, I'll give you props, the way that you've handled that ecosystem, just with the live streaming, just with, again, your VTX and some of the advanced features of how you integrate Auterion's, what do they call it? Suite?
We don't actually use Auterion.
You don't use Auterion. Oh, that I'm wrong then. So
yeah, so this is like our flight control stack is entirely written in-house. So when we started the company in 2014, this was like the first thing we did was write this software simulator and then write the flight stack from the ground up, based on everything that we'd learned. So my co-founders and I had worked together at MIT, then we worked together at Google. So we knew a lot about autonomous drone flight control systems. So
that's awesome.
This might disrupt the premise of your question.
No, it's okay. I mean, because I was thinking that, you already kind of made the point that in order for American companies to truly scale and to truly be competitive on a much larger front, is that one, there's a maturing stage, but two, you have to have vertically integrated components, which makes a lot of sense. Because one of my questions is, how the hell are domestic manufacturers going to ever compete when you've got kind of a systems integrator manufacturing, right? You're using a Skynode flight controller, you're using the HereLink controller, which is garbage. Well, let's be honest,
Yeah. So I think that this is, it's a really interesting point, and I think the solutions that are most compelling in the market today are more vertically integrated. Like, this is certainly what DJI does. This is what we're doing. It's not the only approach. You can go and buy an off-the-shelf autopilot, an off-the-shelf radio, off-the-shelf controller, off-the-shelf camera, put all these things together. When you do that, the trade-off that you almost always make is you end up with a system that's bigger and heavier, because you can't just sort of custom design everything to fit together better. I think you also risk trade-offs in terms of reliability and quality, because if something goes wrong with one module, the natural tendency is to everybody blames the other module. It's like, if the drone falls out of the sky, was it the flight controller's fault? Was it the radio's fault? Whereas if it's vertically integrated, it's ultimately our responsibility, but we also have the ability to fix anything that we need to fix, from the electronics to the mechanical system to the software to the manufacturing process, to make the system work. And it's a difficult journey to make these things reliable at scale. Like, the more systems we build and ship to customers, the more crazy stuff they do, the more data we get back, we can use that to improve and optimize the system. But every order of magnitude of scale brings a new set of challenges.
Well, it's exciting to see what you guys have done in the maturing stage, and with how little time that you have done it. I think it is impressive. A lot of people, though, are wondering, when China retaliated against Skydio, and you guys have had numerous supply chains inside of China, is that because it was just the only availability? Some people were wondering, well, did they not see this coming? Were they going to move their supply chain? And I say that, just one more thing. I say that because, FreeFly, they do their battery manufacturing in Washington, and they've done it in Washington, I think, for like 5 or 6 years. Don't quote me on that. But those are some of the questions that are out there of like, Skydio has made so much progress, and then how did they end up getting handicapped by the people that they're trying to compete with? And I will say, I think it's actually in I don't think it's in DJI's interest of the retaliatory actions that they've taken against you, because true competition is going to compete on feature set. It's going to compete on price point. It's going to compete on the value that it ultimately provides to the audience. And the capitalistic market literally serves the audience best, in my opinion, because you have multiple competing forces, and competition is ultimately good for the user. So, sorry, multivariate question, but as you can tell, my mind's all over the place just because it's a hot topic.
I think it's a totally fair question of, shouldn't Skydio have seen this coming, and why were you impacted at all by the Chinese sanctions? And so when we are designing our products and we're looking at what components we're going to use, we face a constant set of trade-offs of where are we going to source the components. And we take flack for our products being like more expensive than their Chinese competitors and maybe not having some of the features of the Chinese competitors. And those concerns map directly into what components we choose. So if we pick something that's not a Chinese supplier that has worse performance and costs more, that ultimately is going to impact the capability of our product and how much we sell it for. And we've been willing to make a lot of those trade-offs, especially on costs that we incur. So we've invested a huge amount of money in bringing up supply of components outside of China for things that historically have come almost exclusively from China. So one example, this is motors. Almost all drone motors in the class of system we make have been made in China. We spent a lot of money and put a lot of our own effort, engineering, supply chain, and otherwise, into bringing up a supplier outside of China to get away from that. And we've done that in other areas as well. So we pay a significant premium on a lot of our components to use non-Chinese components, and we eat almost all of that cost ourselves. Batteries are one area where, for this class of system, China has pretty intentionally monopolized the market at the cell level. So there's the cell and the pack, and almost all cells, even if the battery might technically be manufactured somewhere else, are manufactured in China. So we had been for a long time looking at alternative suppliers, and now we're fast tracking that because we have no choice. And I'm pretty optimistic, actually. I think there's a lot of companies outside of China that have recognized the need for high performance battery cells that have made a huge amount of progress. And sometime early next year, I think we'll be shipping new batteries that are based on non-Chinese battery components with as good and possibly even superior performance. So the reason why we've been able to keep shipping drones at all in the face of the sanctions is because we had done so much work to get out of China, and it was just a few key components left. And with these sanctions, it'll be down to zero, which I think is healthy for us and healthy for the industry. Do
you see that manufacturing being domestically manufactured, or are you seeing hot spots in other regions of the world, like India, for example?
So we generally have a very strong bias towards doing as much in the U.S. as we can. But I think it's important for us to take advantage of kind of the allied network of suppliers: Japan, Korea, Vietnam. There's a lot of countries out there that have substantial specialized capability. India as well. So we do as much in the U.S. as we can, but I think it'd be a mistake to not utilize allied nation supply bases as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So one question I have for you is, why do you think there has been such a negative sentiment against Skydio? In the age of America First and becoming so populist as an ideological stance, why do you think so many drone pilots have been anti-Skydio? Just because you guys have the biggest target on your back?
So the first thing I'd say is that it's not, the drone industry is not one monolithic thing. There's a lot of different groups of folks out there. And one of the things that, frankly, I was astounded by, so you guys talked about it on your show. When the sanctions hit us, we had to start rationing batteries, and we announced this publicly, which unfortunately, and this, it's painful for us, it's even more painful for our customers, has a real negative impact on our customers. It means that we're going to be short shipping batteries for some period of time, which sucks. The response that we got from our customers was astoundingly positive. I mean, I was getting text messages and calls and emails saying that we're with you on this. We understand you guys are doing the right thing. We're proud to keep working with Skydio. So there's a lot of customers out there who we have phenomenal relationships with, who support us as a company, which we're just eternally grateful for. There are certainly folks out there right now who are pissed at us, and
Some of them seem rather emotional, I must say. I saw that LinkedIn post who said, if you support Skydio while China is attacking them, then you don't support drone service providers. And I don't think I've ever read a dumber statement in my entire life.
Well, look, there's people whose businesses are built on DJI who are under threat. And so they're pissed and they're afraid and they're looking for somebody to blame. There's also, from DJI's standpoint, blaming it all on Skydio is a great narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's much better to say like, oh, there's this American company that's engaging in protectionism rather than address like security risks and national security implications of your product. And so I think that, largely like DJI and their close economic allies have done a pretty good job of establishing this narrative that at least some people have bought into. I think it's a bummer for sure. Like, Skydio is made up of super hardworking, super smart people that wake up every morning really just thinking about like, how can we make our products more awesome, more useful to more people? But we keep doing that no matter what, like we keep doing that whether people love us or hate us or anywhere in between. And the thing that is most directly under our control is what do we do with our products and how are we supporting our customers? And that's really what we're focused on. And I think that by focusing on that on the short, medium, and long term, we will ultimately get to a good place. So, our goal isn't to like prove the haters wrong and, like engage in some internet flame war. Our goal is really just to like keep making our products great and let them speak for themselves. We're not going to be silent on these things that we think are important from a national security perspective, but our goal is to be a pretty reasonable voice in the room and steer towards a good long-term future for the industry. And then the other thing that I would say here is I think the people who are claiming that there's just zero security risks or zero national security concerns, like that is just not a winning argument. Anybody who says that there's nothing to be worried about from a national security perspective or nothing to be worried about from a cybersecurity perspective is basically just instantly disqualifying themselves as like having a serious perspective on this. And lawmakers, when lawmakers hear that, I guarantee you that they just tune out.
Yeah, because
this person is not serious and they don't know what they're talking about.
It's just a basic form of gaslighting, in all honesty, which I was going to ask you, and I think you've kind of already said it, but like if those people were sitting in front of you, how would you explain to them in layman's terms how bad the national security risk is? Because I've seen some comments on Reddit where they're like, I don't give a shit how bad the national security risk is. DJI makes the best drone and I can buy one for $2,000,
Yeah, well, look, I understand that person's perspective as well. It's like, look, I'm going out and I'm filming some real estate photography. Like, who cares? You know, what does the Chinese government have to do with that? And for some set of applications, I think that's like the risks are pretty low. But
unless you're flying naked,
yeah, sure. The other frame that I think is really important here is to understand how early the industry is. So, public safety and law enforcement is our fastest growing market right now. And we're on the cusp of this transition where you've got drones out on patrol in the trunks of police cars, which are used kind of on an ad hoc basis to resolve emergencies, to having drones installed in docking stations on the rooftops across cities, flying out in seconds to respond to 911 calls. So this is what when I say drones are becoming infrastructure, this is what I mean. And it's going to be true for law enforcement. It's true for energy utilities and other segments as well. These are network connected autonomous devices that are fully software defined. It doesn't seem like a great idea to have like thousands of autonomous drones that are ultimately beholden to Chinese foreign policy deployed at scale across US cities, right? Like that, maybe somebody thinks that's a good idea, but I would challenge anybody to defend that as like, yeah, let's sign up for that. And there's plenty of other segments like, 4G and 5G infrastructure, ships, cranes, even phones, where the US government has taken action, where there's that kind of sort of like large scale risk. And I think drones very much fall into that category. So, I'd be happy to debate with you or anybody one-on-one, like the merits of this. My deep experience and expertise is in the products themselves, but, we've learned about security over the years. So, I think there's room for debate on some of the details of what the right way to handle this is, but to deny that there's any any security concerns at all. I think it's just kind of detached from reality.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that 100%. I mean, we worked on a project here at DroneU in association with Sandia National Labs about a system called Project Gridlock, which is you'd have drones in docks flying, essentially covering a grid over a city. And I'm going to explain why this is important, but essentially flying in a grid over a city, snapping a photo every single second. And because of snapping a photo every single second, you could essentially map out every single crime in real time. Instead of responding to those crimes, you could literally, like, you know, if someone robs a bank, you can literally reverse in time, figure out where they came from, and then forward back in time and follow where they went, and then just raid the home. And it's a very fine line between domestic surveillance or what the Chinese could do with that information, and then drones as a first responder. You know what I mean? Like, if you had a network of Chinese drones offering that, there's no way that we could ever defend our cities against attack. There's no way that we could ever really react to scenarios and situations that could present serious danger to the American people. And I think also people have confused that drone in a box, that first responder system that you guys have, drones as a first responder, as also domestic surveillance, when they are not actually flying continuously, perpetually, snapping photos in that manner or anything, correct?
Yeah, so there's two really interesting things there. One is the national security implications. Two is just sort of the domestic surveillance. I think both are really important. And, you know, I fundamentally don't want to live in a world where we've got like drones spying on us in our backyards all the time. I actually think that drones as first responders is the least intrusive thing we can do from a technology perspective to increase public safety. Because if you think about it, it's the most targeted use of surveillance. It's like, you know, the customers use them in response to 911 calls. So like 911 call comes in, there's some kind of emergency unfolding. You get the drone there to figure out exactly when and where something is going on, see evidence, de-escalate a situation. In contrast to just having cameras everywhere all the time recording everything.
Yeah.
And so I think that people who are concerned about privacy, I think, should be sort of most open to this kind of technology use because it's the most sort of targeted, specific thing that you can do. And, you know, from a national security perspective, I think sort of a fair baseline assumption is that any product where the hardware and software, especially the chips and the software, is made by a Chinese company, you should assume that that thing at any moment can become a tool of Chinese foreign policy. They can pull whatever data they want off of it. They can put whatever software they want on it. They can drive whatever action they want from it. And they can choose to use that tomorrow or in a month or in a year or never. But the capability is there. I mean, that's just the nature of how complex these devices are and how much control the people who write the software and create the hardware is. And so, you know, when we're thinking about like when and where and how we use these systems, we should have that in mind. And I've even had people, I won't name them, but I had people who like were in very senior positions at DJI who tell me like, yeah, you shouldn't use these things for like security critical applications. Because they know, you know.
Well, wasn't there a guy who was quoted on Twitter where he was in DJI sales and he was like one of like 46 or 65 people who could go in and like access any drone and any information. I mean, like literally I've pulled up like other competitors' backyards in this GitHub download. I mean, like it just seems like it's not a very safe thing to have, especially for domestic security at all, you know? Now, that being said, I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier that you're kind of disappointed with, maybe disappointed isn't the right word, and I'm rephrasing your words, so I apologize, but it seems like that you believe that there could be a better way to deal with this Chinese issue. And you mentioned, you know, funding for American companies. If you could have it your way, if you could have it any way, what would you advocate for as far as a more intelligent solution to this problem? Would you have the U.S. government subsidizing production of drones? Like, what would it be?
So I very much believe in like free markets and competition. And this is a line of argument that has been used against American companies of like, oh, you're trying to like push competitors out of the market. The reality is that the Chinese have taken political action over decades to favor their own companies. I mean, their export policy, their domestic subsidies. I mean, this is like an intentional strategy that they've run over decades to basically try to monopolize some of these markets that they view as critical and strategic. And so, we're starting from a pretty anti-competitive place. But I think the best things that the government could do would be to try to level the playing field against the things that the Chinese have done over decades. And that could take different forms. There's a lot of noise being made recently about tariffs. Like, I think that tariffs are, one mechanism of getting at this. I think that focusing on the most security critical sectors is another pretty reasonable approach if there are going to be restrictions. And then I think government funding has a role to play, but I don't think we should do what the Chinese tend to do, which is just inject a lot of money into specific companies. I think the healthiest thing is to let end users pick the products that are best for them. And this is one of the things, that this doesn't get a lot of attention, but this is the thing that we kind of advocate for the hardest is, let's make it easy for drone users to get access to funding, especially, public safety organizations, transportation organizations, for them to pick what they think the best product is, such that the free markets are ultimately deciding, as long as they're picking from a secure set of drones, they can decide what's best for them, whether it's like a free fly system or a Skydio system or something else. That's what's going to create the incentive for the best possible products to exist. And make us as competitive as we can be as a country.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the tariffs too would help kind of naturally push manufacturing back to the United States, because if you're making imported products so expensive, you're going to be driving up domestic manufacturing naturally. I mean, is that wrong?
Yeah, exactly. It creates, in a lot of ways, I think it's sort of leveling the playing field. Like, China does a bunch of things to tip the economics in their favor, and that kind of tips it back. And the other thing that is important to understand at kind of a macro level, in terms of just trade policy with China, there's like, China basically bans or comes pretty close to banning U.S. exports into China. Like, the two things that the U.S. is sort of uniquely great at are technology and media. And China restricts both of those things from coming from U.S. companies into China. So we're in a massively asymmetric position globally, outside of drones, just in general. And from that starting point, I think it's reasonable to consider all kinds of kind of playing field leveling approaches to at least make it fair competitive ground for U.S. companies. Like, automotive is an industry outside of drones where the actions have arguably been much more extreme by the U.S. government. Like tariffs on the order of like 100% or more.
Yeah. But looking at that company like BYD that absolutely copied Land Rover, that absolutely copied numerous manufacturers.
Yeah, exactly. This is the playbook. It's like they basically steal as much IP as they can from U.S. companies and then manufacture it as cheap as they can. And we shouldn't tolerate that without some kind of balance.
Do you think China can keep going on this strategy? They are injecting so much money into their economy. Like, at some point, is it sustainable?
I don't know. This is pretty far from my area of expertise.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
So I don't know what the long-term future looks like. I think that the thing that I hope for is just like the most open possible, peaceful world. Like, that's going to be the best for everybody, but we don't get to decide that ourselves, right?
True.
Like, that's up to like the actions that competitive governments take.
No, that's a good point. So let me ask you this. So a lot of people, you had mentioned earlier that you're trying to be as reasonable as possible. And I think I watched your congressional testimony where you were being asked questions, and one of the senators or congressmen asked you, "Are you guys even making consumer drones?" And you were like, "No, we're not actually making consumer drones at all. We're focused on enterprise." Do you guys ever see yourselves going back into the consumer market? Do you, with this maturing stage of manufacturing, with the investment that you guys are putting into these products, do you ever see the capacity to go smaller, cheaper, and wider at scale? Or is the focus still for like the next 5 years going to be the enterprise market? Because you've definitely made some significant gains. And like I posted on LinkedIn, I had some questions about 3D scans capability, and I was absolutely floored when we mapped a dam on the US-Canadian border. And I mapped the whole thing with a Mavic 3 Enterprise, and I got the entire all 32 gates dam in the map in about an hour, but I didn't have any of the data of the lower infrastructure. So all the piping, all of the electrical, like everything that actually runs the dam. And the Skydio X10 was actually able with 3D scan to map at zenith, which I've never seen any drone successfully do before. So that really changed my mind on the value of a Skydio drone. So my question is with all these advancements that you have made in very technical verticals of the industry, do you see, or how long do you see yourself shrinking the package even more, widening out the audience? Sorry.
Yeah. So, we don't talk a lot about future products. We are very focused on the professional users right now, like enterprise, public safety, government. The impact there is just incredible. It's really life-saving stuff in law enforcement, especially. I mean, there's just daily examples now with our customers. They're pretty vocal about it, but in New York, they're using our drones to monitor subway surfers. So like youth who jump onto trains while they're moving. And they estimate something like they've saved 100 lives using our drones by helping to see what's happening and interject. And so, I think the impact there is incredible. The business opportunity is massive, and it's still very early. It's painful for me to not be making consumer drones because I think that, the Skydio 2 is such a cool product. I use it and still use it quite a bit myself. I still think there's a lot of opportunity there. So it's certainly possible that we will circle back at some point. But we are squarely focused now on the kind of professional segment. Even within the professional segment, though, I think lighter, smaller, and less expensive opens up different corners of the market and different kinds of opportunities.
100%. What do you feel like is the most difficult aspect of the drone to what is the most difficult part of the drone that you see of manufacturing to the capability of what is out there on the market itself? Like, for example, a lot of people have said in the beginning, I like with the X2, like, oh, I could only fly the X2 1,000 feet out. Or I could only, even with some of the other drones that we've flown, the American domestic options, you can't get nearly the range that you can get on like a DJI drone. Is that because of the difficulty in manufacturing a frequency hopping VTX? Like, what's going on there?
So I'll talk about the radio link and then in general. So radio is the one area where I think there's some unique technology that exists in China that is hard to get access to outside of China. And they have a very rich ecosystem of LTE and 5G chips. And so they're leveraging that and doing custom silicon and then a lot of low-level custom software on that custom silicon to build very high-performing point-to-point radios for drones. With X10, we've gotten much closer to that, although we're still not at the same level. We have some future projects going now, which we're pretty excited about, that I think will be another big step forward. But the other thing is, I think the future for most use cases is just connecting to infrastructure networks like 5G or 4G directly, which is what we do with X10. We just have a built-in 5G modem, and we're investing a lot behind that, optimizing that connection, getting as much out of it as we can. Because I think that's kind of the ultimate answer, is just the thing is always on the internet. And the range is infinite anywhere that you have connectivity. And if you look at where connectivity is heading right now, it's coming from cell towers. It's starting to come down from space, right? Which means that it's available everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a pretty exciting direction for the industry, that, the point-to-point link is always going to be important, but I think it'll become less important over time as these sort of more persistent connectivity paradigms open up. So that's on connectivity. In general, what's hard about making these things, building a great drone product, I would say the hardest thing is how many different things you've got to be good at. You've got to be good at like radios and cameras and optics and image quality and tuning and low-level flight control software and high-level flight control software and user interfaces and propulsion systems and batteries, and integrating all these, being good at all these individual technologies and then integrating them all together in a way where the thing works reliably 100% of the time, and then being able to build thousands of those systems. I mean, it's hard to overstate how significant of a technology challenge it is. And there's very few companies that have really been down the gauntlet of doing that in a vertically integrated way. Yeah, like there's maybe 2 in China, and depending on how you count, like a very small handful outside of China that have been down that journey. And that's the hardest part. But that's, I think, ultimately what it takes to deliver a great product.
Well, I think you're doing a good job out of it. I know a lot of people are upset, and I think it's I think it's misguided. But I will say, when I read your response regarding the supply chain difficulties with the battery, I think it was extremely well stated. And I did see the positive feedback on LinkedIn that you were talking about here. So that's not just fluff and bullshit. So let's get to the fun stuff, okay?
All right.
You guys have been the leader in autonomous flight. You guys have been in the leader in AI-based flight control systems, AI-driven drones. Where do you see the future of the market? Because clearly your mind is focused on delivering products that don't compete at the same scale of other drone manufacturers, but rather are relying on newer technologies to compete at newer feature sets, i.e. Starlink, right? I.e. having internet-driven devices, i.e. having perpetual, limitless distances to fly. So my question is what does the future look like for you, for Skydio? I know this is probably the fun stuff that you get to talk about at Thanksgiving dinner,
Somehow this didn't come up at my Thanksgiving dinner.
Okay.
Right? There was a lot of 2 and 4 year olds running around screaming. So this is what gets me up in the morning every day. I think this industry is still super, super early, and there's a lot of amazing stuff happening today. We see it with our customers, and we see people doing incredible things with other drones. I think the future is really about like scale and autonomy, and the dock has been a central part of our product vision for a while. If you think about what that enables, it's really fully autonomous operation. It means that you don't necessarily need to have a person on site. You can control and operate the drone remotely. You can schedule it to do things automatically. I think that we're going to see more and more of that kind of usage, and it's going to become more and more important and more valuable in all kinds of different sectors. And I think this is one of the other dimensions on which Skydio kind of challenges the status quo. There's and this is perhaps where some of the why we're not popular in certain quarters. There's some folks in the drone industry that really come at it with like a old school hardcore aviation mindset, which I respect. There's like aviation culture has a lot to be said for it. There's a huge element of safety there, but there's a lot of people that think unless you're like a deeply skilled expert pilot who knows everything there is to know about manual flying inside and out, you shouldn't be anywhere near the control sticks of a drone. And while I respect where that comes from, I think it's fundamentally wrong when you think about how are we going to get like maximum impact out of these systems. And the smarter they become, the lower the barrier to entry is, the more people can take advantage of them. And what I would offer is that, while the transition to autonomy and dock operation might be threatening to some people, ultimately, it's going to open up way more opportunity for everybody in the industry that gets on board with this direction. Because as drones become more important, there's just going to be more economic value associated with them in programming them and training people how to use them, in deploying and servicing them at scale. So I think there's like massive opportunity available. It's just not going to look what it's looked like in the past.
So, and then this kind of goes into the argument of, is Skydio replacing the pilot or augmenting the pilot, right? And then what you're saying is that the ecosystem is going to be so large, it'll ultimately be augmenting the pilot and opening up future positions as well.
Yeah, I think that you don't necessarily have to choose. Like one of the things, you've got a MacBook Pro there, right? So the MacBook Pro has a very sophisticated user interface. You can, there's all kinds of like applications you can open and use. If you want to, you can also open up a terminal on that thing and teleport back to like 1982 and do whatever you want at the command prompt, right? And power users do that sometimes. Yeah. So I don't think you necessarily have to choose, but if all that thing had was the command prompt, how many MacBooks would be out there compared to how many there are today? Like that's the way that I think about it. So we actually are doing some work right now to improve the manual flight experience of our products. We certainly lead with autonomy, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a great manual flying experience as well. That's something that we're investing in. I don't think you necessarily have to choose, but I think that the big opportunities, this is true in all technology sectors, the big opportunities come from expanding the market by lowering the barrier to entry. Yeah. And that's fundamentally what we're focused on. And that's going to be threatening to some people. If somebody's like prides themselves on being like the world's greatest drone pilot for XYZ task, and they don't like the idea of having a novice being able to show up and push a couple of buttons to get a similar result, they're not going to like it. But that's, Skydio or not, that's the inevitable direction of technology.
So, man, I have to say, I'm I'm impressed with the way that you think about it, and I appreciate it, because I think that there is room for autonomy. I think that there is room for piloting skills, but ultimately autonomy is going to get to a point of being able to eliminate the human emotion, eliminate the, I didn't sleep well last night and didn't have my coffee and couldn't get that shot, you know?
So this debate goes way beyond drones. I am a deep believer in, I'm a technology optimist. I think that I think there's basically two possible outcomes for humanity. One is that we build a glorious technology-enabled future, which I think really can get to something approaching a notion of a utopia, or we destroy ourselves. Those are the two possibilities. I think the destroy ourselves doesn't have zero probability weight on it, but I'm optimistic towards the good outcomes. And I think the most meaningful work we can do is try to shape and build the exciting, awesome technology-enabled future. I'm a very big believer in artificial intelligence, and I think that we're on the cusp. In many places, we already have built super intelligent, superhuman system capabilities. But I very deeply believe also that human judgment, human creativity, human empathy, and emotion is always going to be a critical part of the equation. So the way that we think about what we're doing, we're not trying to replace people or pull them completely out of the loop. We're just trying to build a longer and longer lever for human judgment, human creativity, human input, such that people can manifest their intentions and their goals in the most powerful way.
So going back to the doc and going back to what the future looks like, one of our clients that you know very well, the New York Power Authority, I think is getting 10 of your docs, or already has 4. So I can't remember how many they have.
That sounds reasonable. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you feel like that the FAA has kind of handicapped the development of UAS technology in America? And I ask that because it seems like history is repeating itself, right? America was the foundation of aviation, the Wright brothers, right? But where did they sell their first planes? France, right? So this brings up a question of, I know Part 108 is coming up. There's been 3 revisions to it. We recently saw a copy of it. And I wonder, how do you feel about the American regulation right now, especially with Doge coming up,
Yeah. So I've been working on drone stuff basically my whole life, and I've been involved in it from an industrial perspective since 2012 when I started working at Google on their drone delivery program. I am fundamentally optimistic, and I think that when I think about the history of the drone industry over the last 10 years, I think the FAA and regulators have been one of the most popular punching bags for companies that, in my view, candidly didn't have great products or technology. It's very easy to just blame the FAA of oh, we could be doing all these amazing things, but the regulators won't let us. The reality is that technology that enabled drones to fly remotely, safely, autonomously beyond visual line of sight is pretty nascent. I think we're on the cutting edge of this. We're not alone there. And absent that technology, it's not crazy to design regulations in a sort of one-to-one visual line of sight paradigm. And now that the technology is there and the customer value is there, we're seeing the regulations move pretty quickly. So could it move faster? Yes. Should Doge look into this? Maybe. I think there is opportunity. And if we want to, one of the things that if we want to lead the way for the next century of aviation, I think that regulations do matter, and creating a really positive, forward-leaning regulatory environment for autonomous drone operation is probably one of the things that we can do as a country to try to lead the way. But on the whole, I think the progress that's been made from a regulatory standpoint is pretty astounding compared to where we were 10 years ago, and the velocity right now is pretty high.
So let me ask you this: it seems like every age of the industrial revolution has been focused on transportation and the convenience to buy things. Do you feel like drones, especially what Skydio is doing with the dock, could ever be an integral part of the next industrial revolution? And do you see drones as an integral part of that industrial revolution taking the next step?
If you just look at the applications that are out there today, they're still very early, but the applications that are out there today with Dock, I honestly can't imagine a future where these things aren't just where we don't have autonomous drones responding to almost every 911 call, where the entire energy grid doesn't have an autonomous drone in a dock that can get anywhere on that grid and perform persistent inspections within a matter of minutes, where every construction site doesn't have an autonomous dock drone that's continually flying and providing real-time updates. So the way that I think about it is drones should become core infrastructure to basically the core infrastructure of civilization. Any physical industry where you've got physical stuff, buildings, power, cities, military bases, transportation networks, like all this stuff, you should have the ability to digitize it and understand it instantly. And I think drones are the ultimate tool to do that. It's a sensor platform that can move unconstrained in 3 dimensions. And if you get the connectivity and the autonomy right, it can do it without human attention and deliver instant insights. And so I think that's really like our mission as a company. That's what we're aiming to build and deliver. And you do that, and the technology that enables that can do a lot of other things. It can power other kinds of robots. It can power delivery drones. Maybe that stuff is off somewhere in our future, but we're really focused on the like automated data capture problem right now.
Gotcha. So I guess last question for you, Adam, and again, thank you for coming all the way to Loveland. Last question for you is, what would you say to the naysayers? What would you say to the people who love using other products and they say that you're not competing on feature set? What would you say to those people? Because ultimately, I think Skydio has a bright future. I think, this retaliatory action by China has actually proven how important drone manufacturing is domestically. I think it's actually proven how important it is to have these assets built domestically. And, when you're saying that the market has been fundamentally swayed in China's favor, if you don't know what he's talking about the Sentinel program, and you can go on GitHub, you can download it. DroneU has a whole article about it, but it's essentially how data was taken off of these drones to manipulate the ideological stance of consumers to buy their products. I'll never forget the 3DR Solo and how long it took them to magically create their gimbal for their GoPro, And so I ask you, what would you say to these people, and how do we turn things around? Because it seems like at the company level, you're already turning it around.
Look, we have thousands of amazing customers and people doing incredible stuff with our drones today. And we have great relationships with them, and we enjoy phenomenal support with them, which we've never felt more than in the last few months as we've been dealing with these sanctions. So I'm very excited about where we are as a company. To the folks out there that are pissed at us or blame us for restrictions on Chinese drones, I think there's a fair amount of misinformation there. I understand that people are pissed. The number one thing that I would say is I would just encourage people to keep an open mind. And my hope is that if you ever get the chance to interact with somebody from Skydio or to use one of our products, you meet people and you see a company that just cares deeply about doing everything it can to make our customers successful. That's what we wake up every morning thinking about. That's what we're focused on. We know we're not perfect. We know there's a lot of things we can get better at, but I think we are pretty great in a lot of dimensions, and we see this in the results that our customers are achieving today. So, our goal isn't to like prove people wrong or win the battle online. Like, our goal is just to keep making our products more useful to more people. And so the main thing I would say is just I hope people keep an open mind, and hopefully at some point we'll get to work with and serve more and more people with our products.
Gotcha. So last question, when is the next drone coming out?
Well, we talked a little bit about the dock. So we've been in market with the dock for X2 for the last couple of years. The dock for X10, which we announced at our Ascend conference this year, will be rolling out early next year. And it'll be a steady build throughout the course of the year. And that's going to be pretty exciting. Like,
cool.
I know, I can't share, but I know the deals that have already closed, the customers that are buying those things and where they're putting them and what they're doing with them. And I think it's a big moment for us, but it's also just a big moment for the industry in this kind of next chapter of drone use.
That's awesome. Well, Adam, I really appreciate you being on the show. I'd love to continue this conversation again. I feel like there's so many different verticals to discuss, especially with capabilities and what's next and what markets are we not thinking about right now, and also understanding not just about law enforcement and fire departments, but infrastructure as a whole, because I feel like, we're still just talking about the sky. We're not talking about, flying into turbines. We're not, which I know customers are doing. I witnessed it last week. We're only thinking in 3 dimensions, where we still have to go subterranean, and there's a lot of opportunity for that as well. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, thanks, Adam. That's going to do it for us today, ladies and gentlemen. Please let us know what you thought about the show. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below. But we always appreciate you. And if you do have a question, ask droneu.com. That's going to do it for us today.